All right, good morning and welcome to our webinar, How to Achieve Digital Healthcare Transformation. My name is Sarah Bruner and I will be your host today. And as you can see, we have a couple of guest speakers. I'd like to introduce Ed Hine, who's Manager of Digital Verification and Validation at LiveScan, a Johnson & Johnson company. We also have Eli Snell, Senior Director of Firmware Software Applications at Proteus Digital Health. And our moderator today is Avery Lyford, Chief Customer Officer at InfoStretch. So before we begin, let me just review some housekeeping items. So first, this webcast is being recorded and will be distributed via email to you, allowing you to share it with your internal teams or watch it again for later. And second, your line is currently muted. 3, please feel free to submit any questions during the call by accessing the Q&A button, the navigation in the top center of your screen. We will answer all questions towards the end of the presentation. We will also do our best to keep this webinar to the 45-minute time allotment. And at this time, I'm going to turn this presentation over to our moderator, Avery Lyford.
All right, thank you. Let me first a little background on some of the presenters here. Really interesting backgrounds. Ed today is working at LiveScan, but I think his background is very interesting in that he's worked with some very complex environments, such as managing the quality of places like Honeywell and dealing with issues of continuous quality and very complex processes. Currently, LiveScan is responsible for doing the blood glucose measurements, and it's really leading the way in terms of how you can start to use technology to improve the experience for people with diabetes conditions. Eli at Proteus is pioneering a whole new category where you've got a pill that can communicate back to your doctor and creating that whole new category. And he's worked previously in some very complex areas, such as St. Jude Medical, doing firmware for things like implantable pacemakers, as well as cord stimulators. So spinal cord stimulators. So with that, let me kick off and do a couple opening questions. One of the things, people talk a lot about digital transformation, but it means a lot of different things to different people. And Eli and Ed, first Eli, what's your definition of digital transformation? How do you think about it?
Hey, thanks, Avery. So at Proteus, we think about digital transformation as transforming the healthcare industry. We're carving out a new category called digital medicines, and we are working closely with healthcare providers and pharmaceutical companies to transform what has been fundamentally an analog space for decades and move the practice of medicine, including the pharmaceutical prescription process, as well as the ingestion, tracking, and monitoring into the digital world. And that's a tall order. We're making great progress, but it's a good journey down that digital path.
And then Ed, how do you think about it? Because J&J, really different situation. You've got a huge set of incumbent companies and partners that you're working with, and you got to kind of bring them all along as you make this move. So how do you think about digital transformation?
Can you hear me, Avery?
I can now.
Okay, yeah, sorry, mute button on the computer. As part of our diabetes care franchise company, what we're doing is enabling patients to track their blood glucose readings on their mobile devices and online, and their healthcare providers and health management companies can access their data via API interface off of our website. So it's faster access to data, more accurate tracking and trending, and being able to present that data to the patients, their providers, and loved ones more accurately so that they can lead a normal life. And as part of, as you mentioned, we're part of Johnson & Johnson, a larger company, so we leverage some of their enterprise software in the things that we do, but are somewhat independent and autonomous in terms of moving quickly, releasing new releases quarterly with new features and feature-rich applications to help our patients and their loved ones and healthcare providers manage their condition more effectively.
So I'm curious, Eli, when you guys what's been your biggest surprise as you've gone down this path of trying to create this category and working with the healthcare industry?
Avery, so we found out that when patients are using our platform, when they're using our product, it works. We have great data showing that outcomes are improving. However, I think our biggest surprise, and it probably shouldn't be a big surprise, but the idea of trying to change a healthcare industry is certainly one of our biggest challenges. Thinking we can go into a health system and expect doctors and nurses and other practitioners to change their day-to-day workflow, to use new tools that they may not be familiar with, that's been our biggest challenge. And we're working hard to address those in terms of the service model and more trying to fit into existing processes before we can then hope to change them. We had some early product experiences where we put our product out there expecting to do point of sale distribution directly to patients. Sounded like a great idea, but it turned out that that was too different, too new, and we needed to start with meeting patients, meeting doctors, meeting healthcare practitioners where they are, and then working with them to change rather than going in with a fully digital solution from the beginning.
Yeah, there's a saying with revolutions, first they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Great.
So, Ed, you've got a little bit of a different challenge because you've got a whole set of existing customers and relationships that you're looking to move digitally. And have you had a similar kind of, what have been your surprises as you've made that journey?
Yeah, I think part of it's educating the consumer, but then the one thing I didn't mention in terms of digital transformation is taking your mobile device from just a monitoring tool and tracking and showing logbook entries and trends and patterns to an actual Class 3 medical device that can start making decisions. One of the goals that J&J had was developing this artificial pancreas, and I know there's clinical trials going on right now with one of our competitors where they're actually using cloud-based algorithms and technology to do calculations and manage people's diabetes automatically, so to speak. So that's just getting people, A, to rely on the app more for the information, and then even taking that next leap of faith where you're putting that logic in your hand. That's been a challenge for us in just from a regulatory perspective and also development, obviously.
Yeah, it reminds me, when you're learning to fly a plane, one of the big shifts is going to where you just go to instrument flying, where you just completely depend on your instruments. And you can, you no longer, you just have to trust that what the instrument tells you is the truth in terms of where you're located. And it's kind of, I think, the similar thing, starting to, trust that the technology will actually give you accurate readings, even if they're not what you expected. It strikes me as the same kind of a shift mentally, where you have to be able to have just complete confidence in your instruments and your data. So, Eli, what have you seen with your with the doctors as they started to try to adopt this technology and the consumers? And what were the big positive surprises where people said this was a lot better than what they expected?
I mean, some of the rewarding parts about working in the medical device space is those stories about the patients that have been helped by the products. I saw that in my past life at St. Jude Medical, getting a chance to interact with pacemaker patients who are now able to carry on with their normal lives. And we get to see that at Proteus too. We get to hear from patients who have either been directly affected by moving towards whatever goal they might have, whether it's improved blood pressure or improved heart failure or improved treatment of hepatitis C. But really importantly, we also hear from family members who no longer have to worry as much about their loved ones. Similar to what Ed said, we have the ability for family members to participate in the care. And then we hear from doctors as well, who are spending less time, who are focusing on the patients that need the help more than spreading their attention across all their patients. They now have a tool where they can more quickly triage their patients and have a view through our web portal to see which patients need help that day, and it gives them an ability to prioritize.
You know, Ed, one of the things that people sometimes say is that, gee, working in a regulated medical space, it's really difficult, to use technology because you've got all this regulatory environment around you. What's been your experience, and how has automation and some of the test automation made a difference in dealing with the regulatory agencies?
Well, I think from my perspective, you mentioned some of my prior experience working in biopharmaceuticals and distributed control systems with analytical instruments. So the mobile device space is completely new to me for the last 3 years or so. But I was intrigued and inspired by some of the automation that's available, more so than what was done on distributed control systems, what I've experienced there. And it seems like the FDA really can't keep up and is unsure on how to regulate things that go into a mobile device. And there's been a panel recently that J&J is a member of. I think they selected like 12 companies or something to actually kind of prove out their quality methodologies to, I forget what the name of the program was, I should know this, but it was sort of to fast track or pre-approve sort of mobile apps that are being developed. And unfortunately, we're not part of that, but I think that the systems that we've implemented with InfoStretch's help, using Perfecto Mobile and even UFT, part of HP Quality Center, testing our website and those kind of things, just lend itself towards building quality into a system and quickly assessing the quality of changes and performing regression testing, which just builds a case to an agency that we've done our thorough due diligence in testing our product.
Then, what's been your experience? Because one of the things that it's always a challenge is regulators want to know that stuff is repeatable, and how has automation and how has the testing helped in that process to help move things towards approval and inspiring everyone's confidence?
Yeah, so one of the things we began about 3 years ago was a shift from our more traditional waterfall approach to development. I think there were people at the time that would have said we were operating in an agile environment, but when we look back, there were a lot of elements that were still in a more traditional space. Long tails of testing at the end of development. We'd see upwards of 6 weeks of software verification testing after code freeze. We'd see manually created documents like requirements, specs, test reports. We've invested quite a bit in the last 2 years on continuous integration to ensure that we have a much smoother build process, and then on moving our testing into an automated system. Some of that is required buildup of infrastructure. Some of that is required using off-the-shelf tools and building some software glue to ensure that we have a fully integrated test environment. And what we've seen now is we test as we go. A huge component of Agile is bringing work to done, including testing in every 2-week sprint. And then when we get to the tail end of a program, we're able to really shrink that time from code freeze to release. We had a release that went out just yesterday, and the time between the last bug fix and release was about 2 days compared to 6 weeks or longer from a while back. So when we then have subsequent regulatory reviews, whether it's FDA or one of our notified bodies in Europe, we can show them that we've performed testing as we go. We can show them that we have robust test protocols. We can invest more time now in building up the automated test suites because we're saving the time from the end of the program. And that also helps us in the subsequent iterations. So it's been a big win. We talked a lot at the beginning of this webinar here about the shift to digital for our customers, for our products, but a big part of that story is our internal shift as well, moving from Word, moving from paper forms into digital build systems, digital test systems.
And what would be your biggest advice for people as they're trying to do that? What are the pitfalls and roadblocks? Because, the thing that the challenge always is how to conceive of a different way of doing business. Because you said, you thought you were good, and now looking back, you're like, God, there's so much progress that we've made. And what's a reasonable expectation? How do you set targets and get people moved?
I think there's two ingredients. So one is you have to have good people. You have to engage with either a good partner, or you have to hire the right people that are domain experts in areas like continuous integration, continuous deployment. It can't be a part-time job of some engineer or some engineering manager to build up that level of automation. That really has to be a focus for one person or a small team of people. And it's the right people across those areas, the tooling, also the automation test, whether it's the frameworks or the test protocols themselves. So people and the focus is ingredient number one. Management support is ingredient number two. For those familiar with FDA regulations on quality systems, one of the first things they say for design controls is you have to have management support. That's really key for the shift to automation, the shift to continuous integration is you have to have management support, whether it's just the budget support to hire folks, but probably more importantly, it's their support for changing the way that we're working, changing the way that we're thinking about prioritizing work, changing the way that we're thinking about packaging our results up into documents for various FDA artifacts. If that management support isn't there, it's going to be a struggle for the teams.
And what was it that gave the management support? I mean, you had to show them, was it purely a mandate, or you were able to show, hey, if you give me this support, I can deliver these kinds of results for you?
It was a combination of, we brought in some new leaders in the organization that had more familiarity with working in agile teams and working with fully automated consumer products. So for them, they brought that expectation in, expectation of course we should have this automated. Of course we should be working in this way. And they were able at that more executive level to align across their peers. But it's also from the grassroots. I remember we had some project managers and scrum masters that just pushed hard. They were really passionate about moving towards agile, moving towards automation, and they just kept pushing. And it took some time to gain traction. So I think a combination of that grassroots push and the right new management folks that came in naturally, we were able to be much farther along on our journey. I won't say we're there yet, but it's a journey. We're working through it.
Then, Ed, what was your you came from a really different environment in terms of the industrial systems and some of the control systems there, and I think in the past we've talked about how the shift to being it's more kind of it's mobile apps is a very different world because the consumer expectations are different and the FDA expectations are a little bit different. What's been what were the big challenges you've seen, and then what would be your advice? What would you go back and tell your younger self, if you could, about what to think about and what to do as you're implementing all this?
Yeah, I would repeat a lot of the things that Eli said. Obviously, you need management support for any amount of change. Maintaining enough in-house expertise to be able to make intelligent, informed decisions, and then identifying the right tools and vendors to execute it properly is one thing that's really what I would tell my younger self is, expect change and change before you have to. Know that things are rapidly changing, particularly in the mobile device area where technology is advancing quickly. And it was kind of easy for me coming into this role because it's a new space, so I was kind of learning, seeing everything from new. And I'm fortunate also that I had good, talented, knowledgeable people here on staff as direct employees, and being able to find or identify good qualified vendors and tools, as I said, are important. And again, to reiterate some of the things that Eli said, having management support is really key. Having good, passionate people, a Scrum Master is key, as we're in this Agile space as well. And it's funny because when I talk to some of my colleagues in the distributed control system and that sort of GMP, biopharmaceutical R&D environment and talk about Agile, it frightens them because that fast pace and development and kind of running quickly like that in Scrums is probably not something that would work in that kind of environment. But it obviously works well here in the kind of lower regulatory environment that we're in particular as a Class 2 device.
And then how have you, it's interesting, you talked about the different groups, J&J's got a bunch of different cultures in terms of expectations and also different, regulatory environments. So how do you start to shift that and help people understand that, what you're expecting there in terms of, what, super detailed specs and waterfall process and, that level of detail isn't appropriate for the agile mobile world where you've got to, as someone was telling me yesterday with, you've got Apple coming out with innovations that they don't really care about whether or not you want to adopt them. iOS is coming along and you're going to be getting facial recognition whether you want it or not instead of fingerprint. So sometimes you're kind of forced to march along whether you want to or not in innovation. So how do you deal with all that?
Right. Yeah, that's because you're right. The fingerprint ID for Apple iOS is something that we just implemented on our app in one of our latest releases, and now that's going to be going away and moving to new facial recognition. And there's even changes on the automation front with iOS 11 that we're having to adapt with, and so it's never ending. But then to your point, talking to different colleagues, because one of our consumer group has developed this 7-minute workout app with a development group that we've actually used in the past. Obviously, there's limited regulatory intervention there, but fortunately, it's incumbent upon our quality assurance group and regulatory groups and me as a test leader to make sure that we've got the proper test artifacts and things in place and procedures in place. Ramping up automation is just a key part of that, and trying to get that automation up as high as it can go safely. There's always some tests you want to run manually, so I think we wouldn't want to be much higher than 80% fully automated. But again, the speed and return are much better with that, and I think you can automate a lot more. Some of the automation I saw in the distributed control system environment was very manual, where we'd actually use the control systems to power down modules and test redundancy and that sort of thing. So it was kind of set up more like a telephone switchgear, heavily programmed automation, whereas there's a lot more, soft touch automation with Perfecto and things that can be done here.
And you kind of, Proteus has been digital from its birth, and certainly, everybody there understands, the nature of transformation. But you're dealing with a lot of, incumbent, and as you're, building a new category, how do you get all the different, parties, lined up? Because you've got everyone from, Bluetooth to smartphones to cloud on the technology partner side, on the customer side, you've got a set of, different, doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals getting engaged, and you've got to kind of manage across that entire chain and get everyone, you're kind of limited, you're rate limited by the slowest person. So how do you move that all forward?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, when we do get the product on the patient, the wearable on the patient, when we get the digital drugs to the patient, when we get them using our app, it works and it's great. And one of our biggest challenges is all the friction points between, let's just say now and the next patient coming on board. And that's friction points anywhere from introducing the product to them in a clinical setting. Maybe it's a doctor who recognizes a patient might need or might benefit from a few months of use of the Proteus product, or distribution. We're not available in your corner CVS. We need specialty pharmacy, or looking into in-clinic specialty pharmacies. Some of our health system partners have their own pharmacies, and that's different for the patient. That's different than their corner drugstore. And I think, to answer your question, Avery, it's about finding a few partners that want to work with us. Our Chief Commercial Officer says we're going to go deep and not broad, and she's picked a few partners, a few health system partners that have strong executive support, that are willing to meet with us regularly and share feedback. And then back to the Agile, we need to be able to adapt quickly. If we learn that there's a way to save time or get this information to the right person more quickly, we need to adapt to that and do it. And it can't be on a 1 or 2 year sort of roadmap. It has to be done now in this release or maybe the next quarter, but it can't be 2 years from now because the partners aren't going to wait that long.
It's part of the key being able to show. It sounds like, having seen the product myself, when you actually see it in operation, it can be hugely inspirational, and your mind can start to run wild in terms of the really useful applications. Like, your parents don't have to remember if you don't have to worry if whether they took their medicine or not. There's some really interesting applications. And is it that ability to show that end state, at least a couple of cases, tends to kind of line everybody up because they all line up behind, yep, that is the outcome we all want? Is that the key?
It is, and we tend to call that our magic moment, that moment when a patient first swallows one of their medicines with the ingestible sensor and then sees the icon on their app with a check mark or a filled in pill to show that particular sensor was detected. And having been a guinea pig on that in one of our own clinical trials, it was sanctioned. I wasn't going off on my own, but it is a really magical feeling to, after working on this product and then to actually use it and see that when you swallow something, it shows up on the app. It's pretty amazing. And so getting that story out to patients and family members has been important for us. And we've been fortunate to have a fair amount of publicity through some of our engagements with health systems. But we still recognize that there is that friction, and one of our biggest focus areas is on that service model, working through anything from contracting through distribution, supply chain, education. These are all things leading up to patient use that I don't think we expected to be quite as challenging as they are, but they're really important. And we're learning that now, and we're making great strides. Some of the recent product improvements are getting things like patient education portals available, so we can save a half hour of a doctor's time. We know they have about 5 minutes, so saving a half hour is not trivial.
Yeah, I can think of kind of the Tesla moment, right, where you hear about electric cars and the first time you get in one, and I think the same challenge that they had, where you also need to build out this whole network of electric chargers, and now all of a sudden everyone's going electric. So it's interesting as you watch these shifts occur. And then, Ed, I think one of the interesting things in the whole diabetes care is this shift where the app has become not just a kind of a tick box item, but become actually a driver for a lot of usage and adoption. It seems like it's a pretty big shift in that whole industry. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our management is realizing that as well, and we're actually shifting our business model to more marketing patient data through our back-end interface, and seeing that there's a potential revenue stream there as well. So it used to be sort of a nice to have, a freebie that you threw in, and now it's becoming an essential that most of our competitors and most people in this space offer it as an add-on to the meters or pumps or any other items that they're marketing. And it's essential, needs to be a clean, usable interface, and we've made great strides this year in revamping ours and producing new, more kind of WYSIWYG versions of our app. And in running that testing using the more automated means has helped us to advance it much quicker.
And then, is it the same kind of a magic moment when people all of a sudden realize that they can get, much more continuous feedback and stop worrying as much about glucose levels and just be able to get, more real-time feedback?
Yeah, I think we've done, or we do tend to run sessions with consumers when, like beta releases, we get their feedback. Many of the bugs and fixes that we implement are coming from our Tier 3 customer support database. And it's great when we do point releases on a quarterly basis, and when they come out and you actually get comments. We have a knowledge base that supports it, but we've seen comments and people load the app and say, thank you for fixing this problem. I put in this, trouble call or something a year ago. So we've had good interaction from that standpoint, and we know that our customers are using it. In fact, we just won an award in Spain for a digital solution that was posted.
And I think that's, it's interesting to me, as you watch it, especially in the medical space, you have the challenge of the regulation, but you also you have the inspiration of you see the impact on people's lives of the technologies you're developing. And so does that, as you're dealing with, this evolution, how do you take advantage of you getting the feedback? You mentioned some of the customer feedback with the call center. How else do you get feedback to make sure that you're on track from a quality standpoint? What other channels do you use, and how do you know that you're doing the right things?
That's primarily through our customer service and marketing groups. The marketing groups, they're mostly concerned with expanding to new countries and different markets, but also offering new features, bolus calculators, food databases, things that are key that, again, some of our competitors are already offering that we're integrating into our app and have tried to integrate in the past. Those are important things that they get through marketing surveys and that sort of thing.
Eli, what has been the biggest, the thing I'd asked, for Ed before is if you go back and give some advice to your younger self, what would the advice be about how you would do things? How would you get things to move faster, and what would you do differently sooner?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty similar answer to what Ed gave, which is it's never too early to start some of these initiatives, whether it's that transition to Agile or whether it's hiring the right expert in the right area. We thought we could do some of these things ourselves for a while. I remember we shifted into the Atlassian suite using Jira and Confluence probably 2 years ago. And I remember for a very short fantasy amount of time, maybe a day, I thought I could do that or someone in my team could do that. And that's a crazy idea. You need experts. You need people that can focus on their domain, whether it be tools or building up automation or being an Agile coach or being a dedicated Scrum Master. And so if I could rewind a bit, I would have hoped to hire those people on day one, not 2 years into my time here at Proteus.
And love your comments about the things where infrastructure has been helpful to you in that journey.
Yeah. So we've worked with InfoStretch for probably more than 4 years at this point. Been quite a long time. We had a team at place when I joined, so a number of the same team members too. It's been a great journey, and we've worked on mobile development, mobile testing. I've enjoyed being able to bring in some of your domain experts. I remember bringing one of your automated test experts onto our site for a number of weeks to support us as we were looking at the strategy of our automated testing. So sort of leveraging your broader community in addition to our core dedicated teams has been really helpful. Probably the next thing I'd point to is co-located teams. For a while, we had our mobile development and mobile testing in separate locations, using separate groups, separate teams. Bringing those together in your Omnibot office as a single co-located development and testing team has been really beneficial for our mobile program. And then as well as seating the iOS and Android teams together. There's a lot of sharing between the platforms and then a lot of sharing between dev and test. And that's been really beneficial for us.
Good. And Ed, it's been a shorter relationship so far, but I hopefully at least as well, being at least as long as the one with Proteus. Love your thoughts about what's been distinctively helpful about InfoStretch as you've been working on your automation and testing and development.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting relationship and has grown in different areas, as you're aware. InfoStretch came on board doing primarily automation testing for LifeScan over a year ago, and since we've challenged them to help us out with doing some of the manual test execution work and actually doing development work as well. So they've stepped into a bigger role in doing the mobile app development, taking over for another contract organization, or two different contract organizations that we've had, and also helping out a little bit now on the web side, on the development area. As I mentioned before, I think having expertise at a bunch of different levels is very helpful. You know, direct J&J employees or LifeScan employees that work for me that are able to oversee and manage the processes and approve the work that's being done and recommend tool changes and tweaks. We've worked with Perfecto a lot as well. Having, you know, Eli mentioned co-located teams, and while we've tend to use multiple test vendors on different programs, I think just aligning, having InfoStretch doing the development and testing work, even though I think they're in two different locations too, right? The dev team's in Ahmedabad, but testers are in Pune, so they're not necessarily co-located, but just being within the same organization has improved that feedback loop a little bit, I think, into some of our past few point releases in the automation test side, anyway, that's been going on. That's been helpful.
Well, good. And then what I'll do now is open it up if people have got questions. There's some more stuff we can cover here, but I also want to give people a chance to raise up any questions. So get your questions submitted. We're going to start getting into that. You know, in the case of both Proteus and J&J, you guys have both been, you know, the regulatory. I'm going to circle back on the regulatory because I know that there are a lot of regulated industries that really struggle with the digital because of this, you know, whole being able to be, you know, agile and scrums, and things are being changed, you know, under your feet by Apple or by Android, and yet, you know, you've got the expectations of the industry. So how do you start to deal with that? I mean, what would be your advice to other people dealing in regulated industries, especially healthcare, but also I think this applies to finance and other areas? What are the things that you do that keep regulators, I was going to say satisfied, but I'm not sure you ever completely satisfy a regulator. Quiesced, maybe, I don't know. So what are the things that what's the advice you'd give to others in a similar situation?
If I can start, Avery, one thing we've tried to do very carefully as we've gone down this agile journey is ensure that the end artifacts are documents that the agency is familiar with. And I'll give you an example of that. In Agile, there's the concept of incremental development, whether it's, you know, incremental, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Great, so that concept of incremental. So in addition to incrementally adding features, you know, a core Agile concept, we also incrementally create our artifacts, whether it be a requirement specification, a design spec, a test protocol. And in the end, though, we package it up in forms that are familiar to FDA. They can look at those and see them like a traditional SRS. They don't know it was created incrementally, week by week, sprint by sprint. They see it as a whole document, whether, you know, again, the test reports, the protocols. And that's really important for them coming in and seeing something that's familiar. And when things are unfamiliar, we found that that causes digging, that causes confusion. And so as much as possible, the short version of my advice is align with their expectations. Don't expect them to align with yours, your way of working.
I think that's a watchword for all digital transformations is transform, you know, on the inside, but make it look the same on the outside. You know, Yeah, don't complicate things.
In time, they might jump on the Agile bandwagon, and there's some hints that they are, certainly warming up to that with folks on FDA participating in various standards development or guidance development around that. But it's really not something that we can force. We have to meet them where they are, whether it's the regulators or customers.
Ed, I mean, I was really, by the way, I was struck, when we were there, when I was there last week, was your comment that the end product is not a test, the end product is the test report. Is that, and that seems kind of in concert or aligned with what Eli was just talking about.
Yeah, I think beginning with the ends in mind is what you need to do, and it's that validation summary report. The formal tests that we run and document electronically for submission to the agency are probably just a fraction of what we run throughout a sprint development and our development effort. So picking out the right set of evidence, because it's no longer, 10, 15, 20 years ago, you would just like to throw a bunch of phone books at the FDA, right? And the bigger, the bulkier the data that you threw at them, the better it looked, that you did all this testing and all this work. But what we try to do is make sure we're testing the right thing. And that even though you run these automated tests over and over again, you might not want to submit all of them, or certainly not every execution of it, just the one evidence on the final build, on your release candidate build that you're putting out. And we're fortunate, again, having part of this larger corporate resources that the quality and regulatory people that we're engaged with have lots of experience and have lots of colleagues throughout the other industries that they can rely on, but yet they understand what's specific to our application and our level. So we get good console on what's required and why we need to do certain things and why we don't need to do other things, leaning it out.
So how much, when you're dealing with the automation, how much does automation help? In other words, that you can show to a regulator, this wasn't just a test that I wrote down and someone followed some instructions, but it's automated, repeatable, documented set of scripts and that are interacting. Does that help, or is it they don't care, they just want to see the end result?
That's I don't know that they differentiate between what's a manual test and an automated test. I think I would fall back on where I think the automated test helps is providing quick feedback on a build verification. So after a developer changes a couple of lines of code, he can run a full battery of some standard workflows that our customers would use and know if something broke somewhere in an existing feature and function and get that feedback back to him. In terms of submitting to an agency, I think maybe they might have more peace of mind knowing that this test may have been run, dozens of times throughout the development process. But I'm not sure that they really differentiate much between automated versus manual. That's probably a better question for somebody in our regulatory group.
No, that's fair. I was curious because in some cases in finance they do care because it's now something that it's provable. Eli, what's been your experience in dealing with this? Because this is one of the challenges as people look at innovation, that they think, oh, I can't innovate because of this regulatory environment, yet you're able to transcend that issue or finesse it. I'm not sure what the right term is.
I think one big thing it's helped us with is the packaging and the story. And what I mean by that is, in the old days of doing manual testing, it would often be selected regression runs as you get towards the end of a release. For example, if you have half a dozen different release candidates where each candidate has fixed a bug or two, your testing in a manual days would often span the multiple release candidates, and you'd have to tell a story of why it was okay to run a partial set of tests on each subsequent release. And with a fully automated environment, you could run all the tests on every release and not take a hit in time. And we had an example of that this week. I mentioned we got a release out yesterday. It had 3 release candidates. We thought we had the perfect release on release 1, and then here we are, release 2 and 3, because there were a couple of high priority bugs. We are able to run the full test suite on that 3rd release candidate. And it just makes the storytelling easier. Here's a release, here's all the testing. and we don't need to then explain why a subset was run on each of those candidate releases. And it just makes for a smoother conversation, and you know, and I guess that's on top of the story of the more testing more often as we go.
How much does really the rapid feedback with, you know, automated tests allow really rapid feedback to a developer? How much does that help developer productivity, where they get, you know, feedback where they're still thinking about the code as opposed to sometime they've started working on something else, now they have to jump back onto it?
It's been big. It's allowed us to think about addressing defects as we go, working them into the sprint rather than in the old, not too distant past, old days, we would think about feature development and then a fairly long hardening period of time. And that's been important for us to, again, shrink that time from code freeze to release. We don't carry a big backlog of bugs there at the end of feature development.
Ed, what's your experience, you know, at J&J? Has it been a similar experience with, you know, automation helping both the regulatory conversation as well as the developer productivity?
I think, as I said before, it gives our regulatory affairs group more confidence as we go through the individual sprints and qualifying. The feedback is quick and immediate. Development teams, as they go through these sprint cycles, so just like Eli said, it reduces your test fix sprint or hardening sprint at the end of the development cycle, because there you're just dealing with kind of last minute cleanup and things. So, yeah, automation is an integral part of it and can help build the quality in throughout, shorten up the testing at the end, and also expedite those results and give you more confidence in going forward with the application.
This has been really good. I mean, I'd love to, kind of open it to either of you. You know, there are questions you'd ask each other, or what advice would you give to others in your, you know, kind of your similar kinds of roles that are looking at these? Because I think one of the interesting challenges with digital transformation is all of a sudden you start seeing competitors you never saw before. Sometimes you're forced to change before the rest of, you know, your organization is ready. And so, what advice would you give to people about how to deal with this? I think it's a complicated environment to deal with. So, what advice would, you know, Ed? What advice would you give to, you know, to others that are doing this? Where should they start? What's the biggest obstacle they need to fear, and what's the biggest benefit that they should look forward to getting?
Well, I think again, I'm sort of a latecomer to LifeScan, Animas, our whole diabetes franchise started 12, 15 years ago. But I think they're only realizing in the last year or two they need to put more emphasis on the digital side. So maybe providing leadership with the knowledge that they need, or, you know, selling it to them and providing examples, whether it's a competitor's announcement or, you know, competitor product that's coming out or something, and looking at better ways to enhance the release timing and release quality for digital products. There's a lot of tools out there that are available, and finding the one that's best for you and implementing it the smoothest, best way is obviously key.
And Eli, what would you say is the biggest, you know, the things you'd give someone as advice as they're dealing with? I mean, one of the ones I clearly took away is this, you know, kind of meeting people where they are and trying to present a revolution in a very, I'd say, palatable, easy to absorb way is one key insight. But what other ones would you say?
I think another one is we're in a fast-moving regulatory environment. I'd say relatively fast. We saw the 21st Century Cures Act come through at the end of Obama's term. I believe that was December when that came through of last year. And we're starting to see the impact of that. Ed mentioned the pre-cert program earlier, allowing companies to do sort of fast-track software approvals. We're seeing other changes at FDA. So it's a moving target. We need to keep on top of that. One of our biggest competitors might be someone in their garage writing an app that satisfies patients, satisfies healthcare systems in a much cheaper way. We think there's value in that feedback loop that's real, you know, a physical ingestion event. Someone might figure out how to do that in a purely digital fashion, in the sense of purely software, rather than requiring the physical components of the wearable sensor, the ingestible sensor. And it's possible that app wouldn't be regulated. And something we talk about often is what might be out there on the App Store that the developers don't worry about FDA. They don't worry about quality systems. They don't particularly care about automation and testing, and they can just do that cheaply. And hopefully that's not a threat anytime soon, but I think keeping an eye out for what's happening in that blurry space, and it's becoming increasingly blurry between medical devices and consumer products, especially with the changes at the FDA. That's good news for medical device companies that have been spending a lot of extra effort on products that are low risk profile. But you know, you got to keep on top of it, and I hate coming back to people all the time, but having good regulatory people in-house that are tapped into the changes in the regulatory agencies is really important.
Well, look, thank you all very much for your time. You guys you're doing some really, I'm really proud of the work that we've done with both of you, and you know, proud of being involved with the products that you guys are creating, because they're really changing how people are getting healthcare delivered. So thank you for your time, and thank you for the insight about how to actually take all this technology to market through a complicated regulatory environment to a set of customers that and partners that are struggling with how they absorb and adopt all of this themselves. So, Ed or Eli, any last comments? Or? Well, thank you all.
Just wanted to say thanks there, Avery. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for your support and helping us along this journey, and good luck to those on the line that are considering, you know, taking the leap into automation or anything in that regard with their apps that they're working on.
Great.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Avery, Eli, and Ed. I believe that's all the questions we're able to answer this time. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. You'll receive an email in the next 24 hours with the slides, no presentation of this video presentation, and just this whole link to the webcast replay. So for more information, just please visit the link infostretch.com/get started. Thanks again, and have a great day.